listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on creating a service desk training plan. I'll hand over in a second to our host today, which is Tessa Trubridge. She's Managing Director here at SDI. But first of all, let me just remind you to please post your questions for our panellists at any time during the session, and then we'll come to those at the end. And we've also got a couple of polls at the beginning to do as well, so if you could take part in those, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, so Tessa, over to you.
Thank you, Zoe, and welcome everybody to the webinar, Creating Your Service Desk Training Plan. As I said, welcome and good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm delighted to be talking to you today about creating your Service Desk Training Plan, and my name is Tessa Trubridge, and I'm the Managing Director of the Service Desk Institute. I think it's often said that people are our greatest asset, and it's never been more important to arm your service desk team with the skills they need to shine in customer service and support. And SDI can help. As a leading specialist provider of service desk training, we help IT service professionals to gain and grow the knowledge, skills and qualifications they need at each stage of their career. The goal of today's webinar is to help you create your service desk training plan and start planning how to prepare your team to be brilliant in 2015 and beyond. So as Zoe said, I'll be hosting the webinar today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Susan Story. Susan is an independent ITIL trainer, Prince 2 practitioner, SDI associate, auditor and trainer. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Hello everybody.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we're also joined today by Jo Johns, and Jo Johns is an ITSM consultant and SDI trainer. Welcome, Jo.
Hi Tessa, hi everybody, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you today about creating your service desk training plan. So I think before we start talking about how to create your service desk training plan, I just want to start with sharing with you a bit about SDI and why we do what we do. SDI's mission is to inspire service desks to be brilliant. We provide services and products that support the needs of the global IT service desk community. You want to be brilliant, and we absolutely want you to be brilliant too. To achieve our mission, we inspire service desks to embrace best practice to raise the quality of service delivery. We want you to engage with customers to create an inspiring and engaging service experience. We want you to invest and empower your teams to be inspired to take action and be better, and this is where creating your service desk training plan comes in today. And we want you to shine by demonstrating and delivering exceptional business value to the customers and businesses that you support. To support our vision and philosophy, we aim to surprise, delight, inspire at every engagement with our customers, with each other and the community. And certainly one of the aims of today's webinar is to inspire you to create a truly brilliant service desk training plan for you and your team. I think before we move on to the goals for today's webinar, I'd like to do a couple of quick polls, if I may. So this is where we need some audience participation, so have your fingers at the ready. The first poll question I'd like to put up is really just to ask how many of you currently have a service desk training plan. So there should be a question appearing on your screen now, and we'll give you a few seconds just to think about whether you have one. And if you could answer yes or no, that would be fabulous. And I think we're going to close the poll off now. And just looking at those results, it looks like 28% of you have a training plan, but 72% of you don't actually have a training plan. So that's a really interesting result there. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why you all joined us today. Susan, in your experience, is that about norm? Do you find that 2/3 of service desks don't really have a training plan yet?
Yes, I would absolutely say that's my experience. So welcome everybody who's thinking of having a training plan from this point forward. But yes, I'm afraid it is. It's quite difficult. The people that we have in our service desks tend to be really quite instinctively, naturally good at what they do. So we kind of forget to give them any training. So I'm not surprised, but I hope we could change that a little bit today.
Fantastic. And Jo, were you surprised by that result at all?
I was a little bit surprised at how many say no, they don't. But on the other hand, today's webinar is all about creating a training plan for your team. But what I find is people think they've got some kind of training plan, but it's not documented and it's in their heads and not a lot ever really happens. It's a knee-jerk reaction when something's gone horribly wrong.
Okay, fabulous. And just I think another poll question now, really just for the third of you that do actually have a training plan, what I'd really be interested to know is how effective you think that training plan is. And there should be another little question now, and there'll be several options you can choose from. I think from it being brilliant to not very effective, and a variety of options in between. And we'll keep that open just for a few more minutes, just for some of you to consider your answer to that response. And we'll just close that question. So it looks like 60% of you don't actually know how effective your service desk training plan is. Again, Jo, does that surprise you?
No, sadly it doesn't. And I'm sure very often, with the very best of intentions, people think they're going to evaluate it and look at the outcomes of training if they have it in place. But I think that unless there is an absolute commitment to doing so, people get sidetracked.
Okay. And Susan, does that kind of follow your experience in terms of, 60% of those people don't actually know whether their training plan is effective or not?
Absolutely. It's very hard. It is very hard, notoriously difficult to figure out whether or not that 3-day training course actually gave you any value, any benefit back in the training in the workplace. It's really hard to work it out. Some of the things we talk about later on today, I hope will give us some ideas, give you some ideas about how you could figure out whether it was worth sending people away for that time or not. But at the moment, I completely sympathise with you. It's really tricky. So let's give you some ideas on how you can do that.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Susan. And that's a lovely introduction to the goals for today's webinar. So really, there are several goals of things we want to try and achieve with you today. First of all is to kind of help you understand, where to start, determining what training is needed for your team, identifying who needs to be trained, researching the appropriate types of training and courses, drawing up a training plan and establishing a budget, and then, evaluating the training itself and linking that back to service improvements, which will obviously be key for today's webinar based on some of the feedback we've had. So first of all, let's look at what kind of training is needed. So what training is needed? So I suppose the first question is to understand where you get the information off. So you'll be amazed at the resources and information that you have in your organisation that would help you identify the training needs for your team. You have customer feedback, you had feedback from peers, hopefully you have some one-to-ones, there's the goals and vision of the business, there's career development plans, there's skills matrix, staff satisfaction surveys, call monitoring. All of these things can help you to identify skills gaps or possible training needs for members of your team. And this is a great way, I think, to help you understand where some of your team need training, what training is needed, and where the gaps are. And at this point, I'd like to ask Susan and Jo for their input into how you can establish what training is needed. So perhaps, can I start with you, Susan? How would an organisation go about establishing what training is needed for their teams?
Hi, thanks, Tessa. From my point of view, I would say that we always need to consider, first of all, what organisation are we doing the training for? Am I going to be, we're talking about Service Desk Institute, so we're supporting people. Who am I supporting? Am I supporting nurses and doctors? Am I supporting lawyers? Am I supporting technicians and technical teams? Because if I know what my organisation is and what their ethos is, then I've got an idea about my people, our Service Desk people. We're communicators. We're very much up close and personal. So what's your organisation looking for? Is it looking for people who are good communicators verbally? Do they prefer to do live chat? What kind of an organisation are we working for? If I'm supporting nurses, I'm probably going to want to speak to them face-to-face or on the phone. So that gives me sort of an initial idea about what am I going to need, what skills am I going to need for my team. So I need to know the kind of organisation I'm working for, first of all.
And Jo, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of identifying what training is needed?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I very much echo exactly what Susan said, but also I think I've just sort of, my observations were you've got to be so clear about the levels and the types of support that are expected from your team, which kind of underpins what Susan was saying. But those expectations from your organisation, which should also include other teams within your IT environment, and also levels and types of support, not just now, but very much for the future. There's nothing worse than being caught on the back foot. When I used to work in service desk, I remember those days very well when something was lobbed over the wall and we had to support it, and we had no idea what it was or how we should support it. So we need to be looking forward, not just looking to the present. Also, and you've got a nice little bullet point on the slide here, your skills matrix for every single member of the team, including yourself if you're a manager or a team leader. It's got to cover every single aspect of all the work undertaken by the team for every individual, and it must be the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, not just technical skills. I see quite a lot of skills matrices that have technical skills. I don't see so many that also include soft skills, so I'd really like to see that, because our job is, as was mentioned earlier by Susan, a lot of communication in one way or another, so you do need your interpersonal skills as well as the ability to actually resolve customers' issues for them. So all the skills matrices items need to relate to the current support we offer, plus what future products and services are in the pipeline, for which we may well require additional skills, additional knowledge, a different set of abilities. So these are critically important.
Okay, and I think probably the visibility of those skills matrices are quite important. I was fortunate enough to go to service desk last year where literally one whole wall of the service desk took up their skills matrix, and they had all the teams down the left hand side, they had all the skills, soft skills and technical skills along the top, and it was a magnetic board. It took up one wall and it had red, yellow and green buttons depending on whether people were experienced, needed training or advanced level, and you could instantly see the colour on the wall versus the staff and the skills. It was incredible. It was an amazing piece of work to see, but you really got an instant view on who needed what training, where the gaps were, and it was fabulous.
It sounds fantastic, because that's a very visual impact as well.
Yeah, I think it really helped the organisation understand.
I try to match up my skills matrix. I try to use the levels that are already part of SOFIA, SFIA, the Skills Framework for an Information Age, which has 7 levels of ability of competence. And I try to do any skills matrix. I try and keep within those boundaries of the 1 to 7 range, with 1 to 4 being the number 1, for example, being somebody who's a trainee who doesn't have very any experience. Number 2 being somebody who's got a bit of experience but needs to work under supervision, and so on. So try to use your skills matrix as something that actually isn't limited to just your own organisation, but is something that actually reflects what you do in other organisations as well.
Thanks, Susan. And that was SOFIA, wasn't it, you mentioned?
Yes, that's
brilliant.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, that's lovely. So I think we've talked about what training is needed. We've touched on that, and the next subject really to cover is who needs to be trained. I think Susan and Jo, you've both got real practical experience in delivering training and learning experience. I suppose, how can we identify who needs the training? Perhaps we'll start with you, Jo, if that's okay.
Well, the answer is, in my opinion, everybody needs training. Not always on all the same things, but nobody is perfect, and that includes me. So, you can use your skills matrix for a clear indication of the individual and collective strengths, because you've got to look at the team as a whole as well as the individuals. And that gives you a good basis to identify who's likely to need what kind of training. If somebody's great on telephone support, but they're not terribly good at email written communication, for example, that's a clear indicator. Or somebody who's fantastic technically but manages to upset rather too many customers, that's another clear example. And I'm an absolute believer that some aspects of your team's training has got to be mandatory for everybody, no exceptions. SDI courses are a great example. And I remember a few years back now, you sent me off to do a lot of training for one particular organisation. The whole of the IT department was involved, from the IT director down, and they all came to the service desk analyst course. That I thought was perfect.
And in your experience, is that quite unusual, Jo, for the IT director to get involved in that level of training?
Oh, Gosh, yes. Yes, it is. It kind of has a disadvantage in that when the big bosses are in, people aren't always open and honest about what they dislike or don't feel is working within their setup. But in terms of them understanding what their staff are being taught, you just can't beat it. You know, I love to have them understand what we're teaching them.
Absolutely, fabulous. And Susan, is there anything you'd like to suggest in terms of identifying, you know, who needs to be trained and how we could go about it?
Yes, thank you, Tessa. I particularly like the point about the first, second and third line support teams and the core competency goals. I'm very much a believer that the soft skills, the communication skills are crucial. So core competency for me, for a service desk analyst, is the kind of communication skills they have, as well as the technology skills that they have. But then I'm going to be using second, third line, third parties. So maybe some of the core competency is about my ability to communicate with them and their ability to communicate back again. On your a slide ago, we said something about omni-channels, which of course is the modern way of thinking about all the different ways, the choices of interactions that our users have. Some want to have assisted service, so they'll phone us up or come and visit us. Some will do self-service. Some want to use communities. The culture, it says on the slide there about the generation, the X, Y, and Z generation. The Z generation is so young, they were only the ones born in 2000, but they're coming into our environment in a few years' time. So they're the true digital age. So the core competencies change, well, not even yearly, more often than that. So the core competency, I think, we have to know what core competency do we need at the moment and what do we need for the future, and who have we got in our teams right now? What competencies have we got? Does everybody have the same basic competency level? Has everybody achieved the competency? And how do we know what that competency is? So we need to get our act together about what are the core, what's the basic things that everybody in our team has to do? Does that apply to first, second and third line? Or are there different competencies, which there will be, in different teams? I would suggest we should definitely look at that, and also considering the future, the Generation Z, which is us at the moment, maybe not me, the 30-year-olds amongst us, the people who were born somewhere between 1980 and 2000. You know, they have a very strong opinion, very strong feelings, very strong expectation of us. They are accustomed to instant connection, immediate responses, and I think in some ways it's quite difficult for us to keep up with that. Yes. So we should be looking at our competency to make sure we can harness that and actually support those people the best way we possibly can.
Okay, and I suppose in terms of identifying the kind of core competencies that you need in your team, that's something that, you know, the service desk could do internally, couldn't it? They could run an assessment, a little kind of internal workshop with the whole team and sit down and kind of really brainstorm and think about what those core competencies are.
Absolutely.
May I jump in there? I totally agree with that, because my experience has always been that if you involve people in identifying things like the core competencies, they're much more inclined to actually work to it and support what we're trying to achieve, and if they're being done to and just being told. So absolutely bravo on that one.
Fabulous. Okay, so I think we've touched on, you know, who needs to be trained. And now, I suppose the next step is to identify the best methods of training to meet those learning needs and objectives, and research the types of training courses available. And there's a range of training, isn't there, to choose from kind of online training, practical workshops, self-paced e-learning, public training courses, shadowing, coaching, mentoring. You know, there's a whole raft of options for an organisation to choose from in terms of matching up the training needs to the courses and methods to get that learning dealt with. Susan and Joe, you've both come across, I suppose, lots of organisations and how they go about matching training types to training needs. What should a service desk manager consider when they're kind of researching the types of training courses available? Susan, would you like to perhaps help us out on that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think of this in two ways, actually. I think of the use of the phrase training. Training is very specific. It's a way of instilling good habits and skills using systematic, disciplined approach and practice. So if you come on a training course, you are expecting to concentrate on the thing that you are learning. You're expecting to be involved, perhaps do a few labs or workshops within the course so you can experiment and learn. So it's a disciplined training environment. and then you go back to work, and it'll either stick with you 100%, which isn't likely, or you'll take about 10% away with you and use a little bit of that. The other word that I'm thinking of is education, and that's what I'm interested in too. So my training courses that I want my team to go and attend have to reflect the culture and the ethos of my organisation. So I'm thinking also of the education of teams. So I send them to training, I send them to be taught, to be instructed in something, to develop and improve them, and then I want them to come back, and I want that to be part of my team now. So training as an individual, that's training for that person. They want to go on a web design course, don't send them on that. Send them on a course which is going to reflect what you want from the team, so that those skills are developed when they come back. So training, professional courses, I love those, 2, 3, 4-day courses, very good quality training, but getting the benefit of them at the end is difficult unless you've got a good theme about why you want to do that training. Okay. I would also say, looking at what's on the screen there, the responsibility for learning, for going on a training course and bringing something useful back, is the person who's attending the course, not the manager, not the person who's created the training plan, not the person who's sponsored it, but the person who's attended the training. The responsibility for learning has to be put back on those people. It's an expensive thing and very valuable.
And do you find in your experience, Susan, that actually those individuals that go on the training courses don't always understand that it's their responsibility to share that knowledge and learning when they go back to the organisation?
Yes, I'm sure Joe would agree with me. You do have people who have attended the training and you can see they're there for a day off. Not even a day out, a day off. And
I've also had the ones when you say, why are you here? And they go, oh, I was sent, I suppose I'm rubbish at communication. And you go, okay, we need to engage this person, because sometimes they feel it is a punishment. And I always say to managers, look, training is a fantastic reward, because as Susan says, rightly, it's expensive, especially if it's external training. And they've got to see that they feel, or the manager feels, that they are worth investing in. It's not a tick in the box, it's considerably more than that. And so the ones that go, oh, I've been sent, they have to be G'd along and encouraged and infused, so when they go back, they are bubbling with ideas. And I always encourage people to write down on a daily basis, as we're going through a course, everything that they're picking up that they want to do some research on, to ask their boss about, to ask the senior manager about, so that it doesn't just get forgotten about, because then you've got the ongoing development and the ongoing application of the learning that they've acquired.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you for that, Jo. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that in terms of, how an organisation might research and understand, what training and education and knowledge is out there for them to get access to?
Yeah, I mean, the bullet point down at the bottom there, absolutely, Google is a wonderful thing. I know you put internet search there, but, it is a fabulous thing, but do make sure you choose somewhere reputable. It's not always possible to talk to trainers because we're usually rushing around doing other things, but you can get feedback via social media on the effectiveness or the reaction, the response that other people have experienced with that training organisation. If you are able to speak to a trainer, it gives you a really good indicator of how they're likely to deliver a training course. Because if you have a conversation with somebody, you tend to get a little bit of the flavour of them as a teacher as well. And absolutely, the SDI groups are a fantastic forum for finding out what training they're doing, what they're hoping to gain from it, whether they are gaining it. So, everybody out there that is listening, use those forums that we have. They really are fantastic.
Lovely, thank you, Jo. That was great. So we've established who needs to be trained. We've looked at what training is available. And now I think it's the next part of, creating that training plan and the thorny old issue of budget. Susan, perhaps you'd like to kind of share your experience of putting a training plan together. How do organisations overcome the conversation about cost and financial resources?
Yes, figuring out what you've actually paid for and has it actually brought any value is such a difficult thing to do. training in particular, which is why my view about this is that it's not just training on its own, and it's not ad hoc training. It's training that's part of a program, part of a plan, something that you had in mind which has a theme around it. So I'm going to send all of my team on service desk analyst training. I might have 20 of them, but I'm going to send them all. Maybe it'll take me 12 months to get everybody through that training, but then I will have my theme that everybody has been on a course and has picked up certain disciplines. And training is picking up good habits and skills. It's about having a little bit of practice and then bringing it back to work. So then you have a team who's got a common theme, a common goal. The budget will reflect, I hope, what the theme is trying to reflect. The theme is your organisation. What's the purpose of your organisation? If I'm supporting nurses in a hospital, what's the point of training the service desk analysts? So that I can get those nurses back to the patients as quickly as possible. And if I can prove that by being quicker in the way I handle my calls, more sensitive, allowing my nurses, for example, to quickly overcome whatever the difficulty is and get them back to work, then I must measure that. So performance measurement, very difficult thing to do, but if you set your training plan in the first place, then the theme is at the end of a 12-month or 2-year period, I'll have 20 people who've all achieved a certain level of skill, and they are all competent, their core competence is clear. And then I can grow from there. So now I have a benchmark of ability and skill. Budget is a really hard one. I don't want to rush past it, and I'll share, in my view, every day of training I have a budget for, and I would expect to pay between £350 and £500 a day per person for a training day. It really depends on the type of training. Some of you will be able to negotiate discounts, but I would not look at anything less than that to train people. I think that's a fair amount of money. For that, I'm getting a professional qualified instructor course which has a proper syllabus. These training courses I'm thinking of would all result in a professional qualification. Okay. They don't have to result in a qualification, but I think it's one of the driving forces and the disciplines that gets people to go to that training and get something out of it. So that was my little insight into budget for those of you who are listening.
Thanks. And I think what you've kind of identified there really is that the training plan is evolving really. It's not a destination, is it, doing a training course? It's part of a journey of ongoing improvement initiatives. So you don't just turn up and leave. It's part of a journey of improving yourself, your organisation, and that training plan is something that evolves and moves. It just doesn't stop and start over a period of a month, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of organisations, if you're lucky, they will train you when you arrive. You'll get 3 days, your classic 3 days or 5-day training course, and that'll be all you'll get. Joe's probably come across this too. We meet people who haven't been on training for 5 years, 6 years. Because they're good at what they do, and nobody thinks they need any training. That again, that's very short-sighted too.
Okay, Joe, is there anything you'd like to add about putting a training plan together, or the budget issue at all?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you need as you say, it's an ongoing thing. It's not just, well, we'll do training, end of story, which too often people see it as a tick in the box, I fear, so they can say yes, everyone's had training, and that there isn't actually a cohesive plan as to what they're trying to achieve both now and in the future. So, plans for the individuals, because not everybody is at the same level across your team in their various skills and abilities. So there are going to be individual training requirements, but also collectively as a team. For example, everybody does the SDA. That to me is an absolute standard. But also we've got to look at what products and services are coming on stream, what kind of activities are we going to be expected to support, so that we are looking to the future. The training budget is indeed a very, very thorny issue. These past few years we've really seen it, because people's budgets have been slashed. And if you don't spend it all, it just gets reduced. Then you need more money and you can't get it. You have to be persuasive, absolutely. But if you don't have concrete facts and figures ready, if you're asking for money for training, the accountants are not impressed by, well, I'm sure, or well, I think. They need facts and figures, really, really good business cases, and also, and this is back to the hard thing, the return on investment, how can you prove it? So you have to have all those in place as well. And I guess the final thing is that, customer satisfaction surveys are a great pointer in terms of the areas that cause our customers most grievance. And those must be included in our training plans, as well as part of continual service improvement. They should be part of training plans. If we are really infuriating our customers or causing great frustration, those points must be addressed.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Jo. And that really leads us on nicely, I think, to our next slide, which touches on, how we evaluate the training courses and how we identify the service improvements as a result of those. And that obviously goes back to, demonstrating the ROI, Jo, that you just talked about, and actually getting that budget sign-off. If you can demonstrate an improvement as a result of a training course, then it's far more likely that you'll get budget approval to continue with that training program. Susan, how have you seen organisations kind of evaluate the impact of the training they've done and any service improvements as a result of that?
There are some very straightforward and quick ways of doing it, which is related to your customer satisfaction surveys. Typically, though, what we're looking for is customer call handling done, I'm going to say more efficiently, because that's how I would speak to my customer. What I mean is that the customer doesn't feel rushed or hurried, but we've probably reduced the amount of time we spent on the call by giving adequate, sufficient, appropriate and relevant training to our teams. So reducing the amount of time users are spending on calls. That means reducing the amount of time they have to wait for somebody to answer their next calls. So by improving skills, I should be able to see a correlated improvement in how many calls we get through, how satisfied our customers are. That would be one of the core things I'd be looking at, but not only that.
Okay.
One of the other thing that I would look at was that those people that I have sent away on the training, I would want them to come back and I would want them to do a debrief. I would want to, either they could debrief me so I could pay attention to what they learnt, but really I want them to debrief other members of the team. I want them to share their learning with others and continue their learning journey, as you called it earlier, a learning journey, and I would want that to happen too. So improvements which are altering the benchmark, altering the baseline of core competence for my teams. That would, to me, really help to evaluate the value of the training.
Brilliant, thank you. And those things are, really, really fairly simple to assess and monitor and measure. You've given just two really simple things that you could do quite quickly as a result of attending a training course. Jo, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the slide and what Susan has said kind of, sums it up pretty neatly, to be honest with you. But I think also you need to look at, I've got in my head service improvements, so that is our interactions with people. We have to evaluate those via specific targeted customer satisfaction surveys, for example, assessing against the skills matrix. Have we hit the next target up on the matrix that we are tasked with, also by pure observation, by call monitoring, by informal feedback, so we can get it that way. But also, if we have done specific training so that our teams can support new products and services, what's our resolution time like? How are we doing? How often are we having a panic and having to go and find somebody else to help us because we haven't actually learnt and understood sufficiently what we should be doing? So really that's just kind of filling in the little gaps in there. But everything Susan said and everything that's on the slide, absolutely. And the evaluation, I think the other thing is I always get people in courses to physically write down what I'm stop doing, start doing, continue doing, and I say you have got to discuss this with your manager, with your colleagues. So you say, this is what I've learned that I shouldn't be doing, but I am. This is what I'm not doing, I really must start. But hey, all this stuff in the middle, I'm doing really well, and I've got to make sure I carry on doing that. And it kind of sets it in their brain quite well.
That's good. That's a really top tip, actually. I like that stop, start, continue, because it makes it very focused, and very clear, real, and very actionable as well.
Yeah, it is.
I think that's great. Thank you very much, Jo.
You're welcome.
So, I think in summary, really, what we've talked about in terms of creating your service desk training plan is to determine what training is needed, identify who needs to be trained, research the types of training, relevant courses, learning opportunities and education available, draw up the detailed training plan and establish the budget, and then really critically, I think, to all of this is actually evaluating training and linking it back to service improvements to enable you to create this brilliant service desk training plan. And how can SDI help with all of this? Well, SDI can help in lots of ways. SDI has a range of courses and services that can meet your team's training needs. And we have qualifications courses for service desk analysts, I think, which Joe touched on today, and service desk manager training courses. We've got some practical IT service management, service desk skill type training courses covering things like call coaching, customer satisfaction surveys, metrics and reporting. We have something called the Big Red Toolbox, and Joe mentioned Google earlier. So SDI's Big Red Toolbox is an online portal really full of white papers, research, webinars, videos, all based around helping an organisation with their service improvement journey. Alongside that, we have the SDI annual conference and our range of experience events. And they really have a number of, I think, probably inspiring speakers sharing their experience of leadership and management, as well as supporting that with practical advice and guidance on people management, service improvement, and much, much more. So there's a whole range of areas where SDI can help with creating your training plan and help fulfil some of those training and education and knowledge gaps that you have. And have I missed anything, Susan and Joe, that SDI might do?
No, I think that was a very good summary actually of how much help SDI can offer, and just the breadth and the range of training that's on offer. It doesn't have to be a 3-day course. There are 1-days, there are webinars. You don't have to invest hours and hours of going away from the office. You can do remote training. The SDI's got a lot to offer, I think, to help all of us.
And I would say you make use of the red toolbox, the Big Red Toolbox, because it has got a stack of useful stuff from your peers. It's not just a load of theory. There are lovely research documents, but it's practical. And I think, for me, SDI has always been the practical application of knowledge and skills, and that's why I love it so much.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Now, the link for the Big Red Toolbox will be in the follow-up email that we send to delegates after they've joined the webinar. So in terms of kind of where do I find out more, I think the easiest place to point anybody would be to our website, which is www.servicedeskinstitute.com. We have a few courses coming up in the next month if anybody's interested. So we have a service desk analyst course taking place on the 10th to the 12th of February in Birmingham. We have a service desk manager course on the 9th to the 12th of Feb in Kent. And we've got some call coaching going on as well on the 5th of Feb, which is a really, really popular course. So if anybody wants any more information on those, they can find them on the website. So before we finish today's session, I'd just like to open the floor to see if there are any questions that we have. And Zoe will kindly ask the questions, and then I will leave Joe and Susan perhaps to answer, if I may. So if I just hand over to Zoe.
Yep, hello, I've got one here that's just asking, if I have a very small budget, what should I focus on?
Oh, can I say that first, Joe?
Yes, go on.
A very small budget. You don't have to spend a fortune on your training so long as you have a plan in place. If you have your core competency in mind, or you don't know what your core competencies are, then make a little list. How do you want people to answer the phone? How do you want people to type when they're doing live chat? How do you want them to sign themselves off? These are very simple guidelines, and you can start putting your own little training program together to make sure people have these core competencies. So even if you have a very small budget, use it for having a little get-together, a group of you for half an hour, establish some of your core competencies, and then put together your own small training program which says, this is how we do this is how we do that, let's see if we can do it better. That would be how I would start with a small budget. Joe, what do you say?
Yeah. What I would say is if your organisation has a training team, and I know the smaller ones tend not to, but the larger ones do, make use of internal training. It may be generic, but a lot of it, for example, customer service training, is incredibly relevant to service desks. So use that. That's not going to cost you a penny. It really, really isn't. Also, buddying, mentoring, these don't cost anything. So very often the buddy or the mentor within the team really gets a buzz out of being seen as really good at doing something. Cross-skilling, asking if people can go and shadow other teams, maybe more technical teams, rather than send them on a training course. I mean, you don't have to always spend very much at all.
Fabulous, thank you. I think that's a really good idea, identifying, members within your team that are really good at something and helping them train their colleagues. That's a really, really cost-effective way of, cross-sharing skills and knowledge and giving the person delivering the training a little bit of extra responsibility.
Which most of them will enjoy.
Absolutely.
There's also another question that's sort of on the same kind of lines really, but more specifically asking, I have a small team of 5 and struggle to let them out of the office for more than a day. Do you have any suggestions to help? So I suppose we might have covered a lot of sort of you know, cheap or sort of internal options, but is there anything else in terms of a formal training course or?
What I would say, and I come across this a lot, where people do have a small team, and if you're one man down for, you know, for several days, it's tough. If you want to send 2 people away, it is a nightmare. Now, if you have a good relationship with, for example, second line, if they're separate to first line, then very often those guys are prepared to step up and step into the shoes of the service desk for a period of time whilst 2 or 3 members are away. Failing that, unfortunately, means it's going to be a slightly more drawn-out affair because you can only afford to release 1 at a time. And so before all the 5 have done it, you know, some period of time might have gone past. But if you have a good relationship with another team, I would see if they would be prepared to step in and do some service desk responsibility type work in the absence of a couple of your members.
I think that's where the point of having a program or a plan comes in. It's something that you can forecast. It's not a surprise. So
Absolutely.
you factor in the practicalities of being a man down for 3 days as you would do over a holiday or during sick leave. You factor in, plan and prepare for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Susan. You know, we often talk to organisations and we ask them, you know, how often is your scheduled training as part of your plan cancelled? You know, because they haven't factored in the fact that, you know, there might be 3 other people, you know, on holiday and somebody's gone off sick leave. So you're absolutely right in terms of having that forward schedule so that it can be planned and cover can be arranged to make sure that when training does happen, it is actually able to go ahead.
Yeah.
I'd also say that in my somewhat biased opinion, training dates should be sacrosanct. A bit like team meetings should be sacrosanct. These are not things that can be pushed to one side. They are too important. Unless there is a genuine business crisis, in which case everything goes out the window. But other than that, as far as possible, they need to be ring-fenced.
Okay, fabulous. And I think we have just 2 more questions.
Yep, so the first is about the value of formal qualification. It says, who gets the value of a formal qualification?
Go on, Jo, what do you think?
The individual does. The individual gets that on their CV, which if that's not a motivator, I don't know what is. But also in terms of your team, if you can say all my team are qualified service desk analysts, or you know, all the managers here have gone through the service desk manager course, that's a pretty good benchmark of the quality of the people that you have within your organisation. That's kind of that. I'm done on that one.
I have a view also on that. The qualification, I agree, absolutely belongs to the individual. So it's very much a personal motivation. But if I am the manager of the team and I've sent them on the training and they've had to do a qualification, what I can be sure of is they've paid attention to the training. They've had to learn something because they've had to actually sit down and pass a test. The value of that is that they come back with some clear, disciplined ideas. It's up to me as the manager to ensure that I hang on to that I keep that. But the value of the qualification is a motivator for the individual, and actually it brings back better level of learning when they come back to my team. So I think we both get value out of it, but the individual and the team.
Absolutely, and I think if the individual's gone back with a better understanding and better knowledge, the organisation benefits from that because they see a much better improved service as a result of that.
Yes. Right. Yes.
And then, of course, we need to ensure it is maintained and improved incrementally all the time.
Absolutely. And I think we have one final question.
This is asking if there are any templates available for core skills service desk analyst that they should have as a minimum.
That's a great question, and I do use one. I do use one. I have it in my downloaded copy of the Service Desk Analyst standards. It tells me exactly what they have. There's something like, I don't know, there's a list of them. If you go through, there's a list of 9 core competencies, which are your personal communications, your I can't think of any now, ability to handle customers, you understand differentiation of customers. I use the SDA standards, and I take the ones, the 9 core skills, and then I look at the ones that are relevant to the team and the organisation I'm currently working with. And it, for me, always comes down to communication skills, communication with my customers, communication with the other teams. These are some of the core competencies that I have. It's also about being able to document things accurately, which is a form of communication, but you've got to have it as a core competency, the documentation. So I would go and download the SDA standards, which are available on the website, and I would prune, because there's quite a lot of them, there's about 110 or something, and I'd prune them down to the ones that you feel in your team would really be the core competency. And then you can start with 10, I would suggest. Start with 10 core competencies for your teams, and then see if you can get the agreement, the buy-in of the other members of the team.
And that's something that actually the organisations that don't have a training budget can absolutely do at no charge, because those standards are free, so they are readily available to anybody, and you can start that as a basis for your training plan and your core competencies without actually investing any budget at all.
That sounds really attractive, doesn't it, when you put it like that, Tessa?
Absolutely. So, was there anything you wanted to add to that, Jo, just to finish off?
No, I think Susan pretty much said what I would say, although I don't actually have a list written down myself. I know exactly where she's coming from, and I think it then evolved into my instinctive reaction, which is we need to agree within our team what those core competencies should be, which is what we talked about at the very beginning of this webinar. We said sit people down, have the discussion going, so that we then have the mutual support and agreement going forward to make sure we hit them.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, Jo. Well, I think that really brings today's Creating Your Service Desk Training Plan webinar to a close. So I would just like to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you for taking part in the polls. I'd like to thank both Susan and Jo for their valuable insights, support and guidance today. I think it's been a really brilliant webinar, and you'll get an email following this webinar with some links to things like standards and the toolbox. So as I say, thank you for joining us, and good luck on your training plan. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.